Thanks for joining us here. It's great to be together again. If you're new here, my name is Lou. I'm one of the pastors here. I work here with those two guys all week long. Today, we are continuing a teaching series called BC. We're looking at stories that happened before Christ. So in case you don't know, Jesus showed up around 2,000 years ago. And if you have a Bible, your Bible is split up into two parts. There's the Old Testament and there's the New Testament. The Old Testament is made up of stories that came before Jesus. And so it's split up into two parts, but they're not even parts. The Old Testament's way bigger, in case you don't know that. And then the second part, the New Testament, contains all the information about Jesus, or lots of the information about Jesus. And so we're taking a few weeks to look at the stories that came before Jesus in the Old Testament. Now, what's cool about these stories is that they were the stories Jesus would have been told growing up. These stories are thousands and thousands of years old. And even right now, today, in the world, 56% of the global population, 56% come from a tradition that values these stories. So it's not an overstatement to say that these stories have really helped to shape the world as it is today. So last week, we talked about the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, which is a difficult story to kind of wrap your mind around, but it's a story of origin, of identity. And in that story, God shows up in some really vivid ways. And he says some things that are to the people in the story that are really clear, right? And we see this over and over and over again throughout the stories in the Old Testament. In fact, the ways that God shows up are so vivid, they're so amazing, they're so profound, that sometimes they can be difficult to relate to, right? There are some really amazing transformative principles from these stories, but God shows up in a way often that I've never seen him show up. And he says things often in a way that I've never heard him speak. Right? Like in the story of Adam and Eve, he shows up there in a very vivid way. We're told he's like walking through the garden, and they know not to eat from a tree because he literally said, don't eat from a tree. Now, I hear that, I'm like, what did his voice sound like? Does he have a deep voice? Is he serious? Is he just like happy? Like, what is it? I don't know, because I've never seen him that way, and I've never heard him that way. There's the story later on of Moses, right? Like God shows up in a burning bush, and he speaks from the bush. I've never seen him show up like that in my life, and I've never heard him speak like that in my life. And there's some amazing principles, but they're kind of hard to relate to. You have to do some interpretive work to really understand what it means for us today. The story that we're talking about today, the reason that I love it so much is because in this story, God shows up in a way all of us have experienced, all of us. Whether you're a church person or not, whether you've been in the church your entire life, or you're just here today for the first time because you're doing your girlfriend a favor, or wherever you are in your faith journey, you have seen God show up in the way he shows up in the story that we're looking at today. And we're going to see him speak in a way that he, I'm sure, has spoken to you at some point or another in your faith journey. Whether you've been around in the church for decades, or this is your first time ever in a church. There's a challenge that we're given in the story that we're looking at today. And in the midst of this challenge, we see God show up in a way we've all seen. And we see him speak in a way we've all heard him speak. And so, story we're looking at, but I'm not going to tell you what it is, how he shows up and what he says, until later, okay? So we're looking at the story of Esther. Now, a little bit of background here. The Old Testament is primarily the history of Israel, right? It's the history of the ancient Jewish people. Esther is a person who is around in ancient Israel. She's an ancient Jewish person. She's got a whole book named Esther. There's 10 chapters in it. And by the end of today, you're going to know Esther is all about, if you don't already know what Esther is about. And so the ancient Jewish people, a little background here, they were promised that, like, God spoke to a guy named Abraham and said, you're going to have kids, and their kids are going to have kids, their kids are going to have kids, and the whole world will be blessed through your descendants. Like, your family's going to be so big, it's going to become a nation. In fact, the Old Testament, this is an oversimplification, but it's basically God showing himself to the world in the form of a nation. The New Testament is God showing himself to the world in the form of a person. It's Jesus. And the Old Testament is in the form of a nation. It's Israel. It's like an oversimplified version of the Old and New Testament, okay? So Esther's one of these ancient Jewish people in the Old Testament. Now, the problem is that when Esther was around, her people were in exile, meaning they had been conquered by another group of people. They were conquered by Babylon. That's cool, right? There we are again. In the story, Babylon's always the bad guy, just so you know. It's not really like a great thing to be called Babylon. But then the Babylonians were conquered by Persia, right? So this is like if you're on the playground and there's a bully and you're getting bullied and your lunch money's taken, but then there's a bigger bully that comes along and starts to bully the bully, and now you're like 2 bullies deep. That's the situation that ancient Israel was in, right? Like, they were bullied by Babylon. Then Persia came in and conquered Babylon. Now they're being bullied by Persia. So they're living under Persian rule. The Persians come in with their rugs and their cats, and they take over the place, all right? So there's a king of Persia. His name is Xerxes. Xerxes is this picture of ultimate power. In fact, he's so powerful that you weren't even allowed to approach him. If you approached him and asked a question, you would just be put to death, unless he showed you his golden scepter, which meant, fine, ask your question and you'll be spared. But you weren't allowed to even ask him questions, which seems totally inhumane. Unless you're a parent with like real little kids and you know what questions are like all the time, nonstop, then it's kind of like, all right, maybe we should have a little golden scepter in our house, you know, and like we're not going to kill anybody, but the idea is maybe not so many questions. Okay, so you can't go and approach the king, Xerxes. In the story of Esther, Xerxes is portrayed as this person who loves power, but he also loves to party. He's never really doing that much that's all that important. He's full of himself. He's kind of portrayed as a mush. If you're into history, Xerxes, this is the same Xerxes that's in the movie 300. If you ever seen 300, this is Xerxes. He's known as the King of Kings, Xerxes the First, or Xerxes the Great. This is the same Xerxes that conquered Babylon, that had the Jewish people in exile, all right? So Xerxes is throwing a party. This is like a normal thing. It's how the story starts out. He's throwing a party. He's got a queen. Her name is Vashti. Vashti is a beautiful queen, and to him, she is just one of his possessions. And so at this party, he's like, bring me Vashti. Right? I want Vashti to come out and she's gonna dance for all my people. If you like pictures, we've got pictures all along the way, all right? And each character has a color so you can follow around along with the colors, okay? So he calls up for Vashti. He's like, bring Vashti here, she's gonna dance for us. And Vashti hears about this, she's like, sorry pal, I'm not coming out to dance for you and your friends just so you look cool. So she rejects him. Now, in the ancient world, you didn't do this, especially a king that you're not even allowed to ask questions to, right? So for Vashti, she was gone. That was it. You're not going to dance for us? You're out. And so she's no longer the queen. And so now Xerxes is like, all right, well, I'm going to find another queen. And so he has this beauty pageant. This is actually the first season of The Bachelor here. He gets all these women in Persia to come and basically audition to be his wife. And one of the women who auditions in this beauty pageant is Esther. Esther, she's pink or magenta. Esther is an ancient Jewish person, but she keeps that a secret. She doesn't tell them that she's Jewish, but she's entered into this pageant. Now, you may hear this story, and maybe you know, like there's a whole book of the Bible named Esther. So you think of Esther and you're like, oh, she must be awesome, right? Like doing the right thing all the time. That is not the picture that's painted of Esther. Esther does some things that are pretty scandalous. She's not the like do it right all the time type of person. In fact, in the ancient Jewish law, like their commands they had from God, they believed, Jewish people were not allowed to marry people who weren't Jewish. And so she's entering a contest for the privilege of being able to marry the Persian king. Like she's looking to very intentionally break one of God's commands. Not just that, but remember the situation with Vashti? Like how she's like, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna dance at your parties. Esther's basically like, I will. And she is totally fine with being the entertainment for these people. And so she shows up. The king immediately falls in love with her. He's like, this is the woman I want to be my queen. And he takes her as his queen. And she gets sent away for 12 months to go prepare to be queen for 12 months. I don't know what kind of preparation that is, but she's gone for 12 months. Now, we meet someone named Mordecai. Mordecai was Esther's caretaker. Esther grew up an orphan. She had no parents. Mordecai was her cousin, and he took care of her. The picture that's painted of Mordecai is someone he's not perfect, but he's a person of principle, right? He cares for her. He's generous. He's selfless. He's loving. He takes care of Esther, right? And so now he's got connections. He's a Jewish person. He's got connections to what's going on in the palace. Well, one day he's just out and about, right? He's hanging out, we're told, at the king's gate. And he hears a little conversation happening over at the king's gate. There are these two people that work for the king, and they don't like the king. And so they've decided they're going to kill the king. Now, Mordecai's sitting over there, and he's just like eavesdropping on their situation. He hears, oh no, someone's going to try and kill the king. And while he's not crazy about Xerxes, because Xerxes not the best, he's not the best ruler, Mordecai's like, all right, I guess, I don't know, it's kind of family now, right? Like maybe I should look out for him. And so Mordecai tells Esther to tell the king, like, hey, there's a plan for the king's life. The king's going to be killed unless somebody acts and stops these people. And so that day, Mordecai saves the life of King Xerxes. It's kind of like a random little story at the beginning of the book of Esther. Well, in this story, we also meet someone named Haman. All right, this is the bad guy. Haman, he's green. Haman is full of himself. He's the picture of pride in the story. He's number 2 in the kingdom. Like there's Xerxes, and then right under Xerxes is Haman, right? Now, Xerxes makes a law that all the people in the land need to bow to Haman. What this tells us, at least people who study this, would say that this shows us that Haman was not very likable. People didn't like him. Like in the ancient world, it was common to bow as a sign of respect to people in authority. And so for the king to make a law saying you have to bow when you see this guy implies nobody wants to show this guy any respect, right? So he's the bad guy. Think like Jafar, okay? That's the vibe of Haman, Jafar, right? Well, one day Haman sees Mordecai. Mordecai doesn't like Haman. And so Haman's like, hey, you know the rules. And Mordecai's like, sorry, pal, not bowing to you. And Haman can't take this. He's filled with anger. He's like just beside himself because this guy will not bow to him. And so he knows Mordecai is Jewish, and he decides that day that he's going to come up with a plan to kill all of the Jewish people in Persia, all of them. And so Mordecai's beside himself, right? Haman approaches the king, and he doesn't tell him that it's the Jewish people, but he tells them that there are these people among them that don't respect the king. They're not impressed by his power. He just basically talks them down and says, we should get rid of these people. And so Xerxes is on board with that idea. He's like, all right, fine. Like there are people that aren't on board with me and my power. Let's get him out of here. Now, I wrote here Jewish. This is actually not true. He doesn't tell them that it's Jewish people. He just says a group of people. And so Xerxes issues a decree that in 11 months, all the Jewish people are going to be wiped out. Why 11 months? They rolled the dice, and literally they got 11. Like that's actually what happened. They're like, all right, let's kill them in 11 months. And so 11 months from that day, they decide to kill all the Jewish people. Well, Mordecai hears about this. He's obviously very upset. 1, he's going to lose his own life. And 2, he's the reason that all of his people are going to be killed. This is a really upsetting thing. And so he reaches out to Esther, who's in the palace, who's married to the king. And he says, Esther, you've got to go to the king and you've got to plead on behalf of your people. You've got to let him know that you're Jewish. You've got to tell him, like, somehow get him to cancel this plan or we're all gonna die. And so there's this conversation between the two of them. And here's what happens. He tells her she's got to go to the king, and Esther replies, she says, listen, Mordecai, this is actually through a messenger. She says, Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces, they know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, remember the rule? The king has but one law, that they be put to death. You can't just go in there with questions. This is gonna cost me my life. Well, okay, no, unless there's that one thing, the king extends the golden scepter to them and spares their lives. Okay, then they won't be killed. But she's saying, remember, like, this is the situation. You're telling me basically just go give my life. And so Mordecai comes back and he says, don't think that because you're in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. Like, if he's gonna kill us, it's gonna get to you too. He says, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. What he's saying is God made a promise to Abraham, like back then, he's gonna keep his promise. Somehow, like, our people are going to survive. But he says, but you and your father's family will perish. This will end up bad for a lot of people. You should do something about this. And then he drops this line, which goes down in history. He says, and who knows, Esther, but that you have come to your royal position as queen for such a time as this. Like, maybe you are where you are at the time you are. Maybe there's a purpose for all of this. So she's convinced. And she says, go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, this is the capital of Persia, and fast for me, pray for me. She says, don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. She says, when this is done, I'll go to the king, even though it's against the law, even though it might cost me my life. And if I perish, I perish. Fine, I'll risk it all. Maybe there is a purpose to this position. And so she goes to the king, risking her life, to ask him a question. And in the moment, he can either send her away to be killed or extend the golden scepter. He extends the golden scepter. He allows her to ask her question, and she asks a question. She requests that he attends a banquet. Like, remember, as if to say, like, remember why you like me so much? Let's do one of those parties. Like, let's have a good time together. And so she does. They have this banquet. He agrees. He's like, fine. Haman comes along because Haman's number 2. And the 3 of them together have this first banquet. It's a big, lavish banquet. We're told there's a lot of drinking there. And there, the king's like, all right, ask me your question. I know this isn't what it was about. Ask me the question. And she's like, all right, you got another request? Okay, here's my second request. She says, how about another one? Will you come to my banquet tomorrow night? Let's do this again. Why not? I don't know. Maybe she's stalling, but she wants to have another banquet. And so he's like, well, this was fun, so we'll do another one. He agrees to have another banquet the following night. Well, they leave that party. We're told Haman leaves, and he's intoxicated. He's very emotional. He's making his way back to his place, and who does he bump into? He bumps into his pal, Mordecai. And he sees him. He's like, hey, remember, there's a law. You got to bow. And Mordecai's like, no, still no. Not doing it. And he's furious. And so Haman decides he's not waiting 11 months for this man to die. He's going to take care of this man as soon as possible. And so he sets up this stake so that Mordecai can be killed the following morning. Then he goes home. Mordecai goes home. Everyone goes home. Mordecai thinks he's going to lose his life the next day. Well, that night, the king can't sleep. And this is the first time in the story I really can connect with Xerxes. He's up in the middle of the night, can't fall asleep, right? And so what do you do when you can't fall asleep? Well, Xerxes didn't have Netflix to binge watch or nature documentaries to help him doze off. And so he calls one of his subjects and he's like, read me a story, which must be nice. And the subject is like, which one? And he goes, read me the one about me. In the ancient world, they were called the King's Chronicles. They would record what happened to the king in the life of the king to preserve it throughout history. And so the guy comes out, he starts reading stories about Xerxes. And he just so happens to read a story about a man named Mordecai, who overheard a conversation between two people who were planning on killing the king, and how Mordecai made sure the king's life was spared. He saved the king's life. And Xerxes hears that story and he's like, that's right. Wait a minute, you ever have one of these moments like, did I ever say thank you to those people? And he realizes that he's there where he is because of Mordecai. And so he's got to do something. So he calls his director of operations. He gets Haman in the room and he asks Haman a question. He's like, all right, Haman, if there's someone I want to honor, if there's someone I want to celebrate, if there's someone I'm super grateful for, what can we do? What shall be done, he says, for the man the king delights to honor? And Haman, I should tell you a little bit about Haman. He's like, he's talking about me. And so his response essentially is like, let's go big. He's like, let's do a parade. We're doing a parade. Like, we'll bring the king's horse. He's like, I'd let him ride on the king's horse. I'd pull him around town. We're going to close Main Street just so that people can come out and cheer for this person that you want to honor. Like, really over the top. This is going to be amazing. And the king's like, awesome, fantastic. I need you to go set that up for Mordecai. And Haman is beside himself. And this is the first like major reversal of the story. And so Haman now, like picture this, is out on the street pulling Mordecai around on like a pony ride. And people are honoring Mordecai for what he's done. And so Haman has a pretty rough day. But thankfully that night there's a party. And so he can just get through this, get to the party, and it's going to be great. And so they go to the second banquet, Esther's second banquet. She's like, welcome back, everybody. And same kind of thing happens. It's a party, they're celebrating, and then it comes to the point where she's able to make a request, and she does. She reveals who she is, that she's Jewish. And she asks the king to spare her people. She reveals that Haman has essentially tricked Xerxes into planning on killing all of the Jewish people. And someone like Xerxes, especially while he's drinking, is not okay with being tricked. And so at that point in the story, everything basically gets reversed. That stake that was set up for Mordecai ends up being the stake that Haman dies on. He sentences Haman to death. And Mordecai is given Haman's position. Mordecai becomes the number 2 in Persia. And all of the people end up getting spared. And everything works out in the end. It's an amazing story of like dramatic coincidences and reversals. And so that's the end of the story. Everything comes together in the end. Esther saves her people. In fact, today even, there's a holiday that's celebrated today by Jewish people. It's called Purim. And it's celebrating the day that Esther saved her people from Haman. It's almost like a Jewish Halloween. There's like exchanging of candy and there are traditions. When you tell the story, all the kids scream whenever they hear the name Haman. It's like it's an actual thing. They still celebrate. So that's the story. That's the story of Esther. Now here's my question. Did you see how God showed up in Esther's story? Did you hear what he said? Like through all of that difficulty, as things got progressively worse and worse and worse. Did you see the way he showed up and what he said? In the story of Esther, God shows up nowhere. And he says nothing. It's the only story in the entire Bible God's not even mentioned. And it's very intentional. The author There are points in the story where the author very clearly could have used the name God, but it's like he tiptoes around it to avoid bringing God up in the story. God is not mentioned once. Now put yourself in Esther's shoes, right? She's an orphan. That's tough. She's being raised by her cousin. That's not easy. Her people are in exile, not once, but twice. From Babylon and then from Persia. Her cousin tries to stand up for himself, and all of her people are sentenced to death. She basically believes that she's got 11 months to live. While all of this is unfolding, she hears her caretaker, her cousin, is going to be killed within 24 hours. Things just go from bad to worse for Esther. They keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And throughout all of it, there's no mention of God. God's got nothing to say. And for her, this has got to be a pretty dark place. And for me, this is something I can connect with. This is something I can relate to. And this is the way I think all of us have seen God show up at some point or another. Have you ever been there when things get worse and worse and worse and God shows up nowhere? Right? And maybe you're hearing stories from your people that believe this stuff, and it's like, God is doing such cool things in their lives. Or maybe you're reading stories like, God's doing such cool things throughout history. But where is he in my story? And he's got nothing to say in my story. This is the story of Esther. And that I get. This I can connect with. Where is he? Things just keep getting worse. There's this ongoing thing with my wife, Allie, and I in our house. I said it's kind of like this running joke. She doesn't think it's a joke. But she says, whenever I've been in the kitchen, whenever I've gotten food in the kitchen or done something in the kitchen, she's like, I always know you were in there. She's like, and I can tell what you ate. I can tell which cabinets you were in. I can tell which bowls and utensils you use. I'm like, okay. She's like, the evidence is everywhere. You don't have to be there. I just see that you've been there. I'm like, okay, I'm working on it. But this is the story of Esther. If you step back, you see the evidence is everywhere. It's one random coincidence after the next, but it takes zooming out, right? It just so happens that the king falls in love with Esther. It just so happens that Mordecai hears a conversation happening. It happens to be in the right spot at the right time when a conversation is happening. It just so happens that night the king can't sleep. It just so happens that he decides to be read a bedtime story. It just so happens that it's the story about Mordecai. It's one thing after the next, after the next. If you zoom out, it's very obvious that there's something happening, not up front, but behind the scenes. God is not absent in the story, but it appears like he is. He's apparently absent. But the whole time, he's working in the background. And I don't know what your life is like right now. I don't know what your season of life is like right now. Maybe it's not a season of life. Maybe it's your whole story and you're like, I haven't seen God in my story. And maybe if you step back and looked at the way one thing led to the next and to the next, maybe there was somebody working in the background. God's fingerprints are all over this story. But you know what's interesting? The story, if you look at the arc of the story, all right, it's bad things happen and they just keep getting worse. Then there's an event. And then all those bad things get reversed. If you like to study this stuff, you should study the format of the book of Esther. It's very intentional. There are events that are bad, then there's corresponding reversals of that event. But then there's an event right in the middle of all the bad becoming good. And this is the thing that the author of Esther wants us to see from this story. This is the point. It's all pointing to what happens directly in the middle of the story. And it's the conversation between Mordecai and Esther. When he challenges her to go, and when she says it's going to cost her life, he makes a suggestion and says, who knows? But that you've come to your royal position as you are, where you are, at the time you are, for such a time as this. He's suggesting that perhaps there's a purpose to the position you're in. Perhaps there's a purpose to the position you're in. Maybe you're here for a reason. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear people suggest that, like, oh, maybe God is doing something in the season that you're in, the reason for me that I want to just kind of write that off is because I know me better than anyone else knows me. I know my issues, I know my doubts, I know my mistakes, I know my past, I know it all. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not like the vessel that God's going to do something with. Right? But if you look at Esther's story, this is what I love so much about Esther. She's not like the picture perfect person. In fact, the royal position she's in was a position that was against the law for her ancient Jewish people. Like, she was not allowed to be married to the Persian king, but she was. This has people who study this, they're like confused because there's all this moral ambiguity. But the idea here is not that God caused it, not that he's like telling them it's a good idea. The idea is that wherever you are, as you are, the way you are, at the time that you're where you are, God can bring purpose to that situation. God can use that situation for good. Like, perhaps there's something you can do in that situation that you wouldn't be able to do if you weren't in that situation. And this is what he's suggesting here to Esther. Perhaps you're in the position you're in, and there's something you could do that you wouldn't be able to do if you weren't in this position. He's not saying that God caused this to happen. But given that you are where you are, God can bring good from this. And a lot of people will benefit from it. But there's a part of the story that Esther has to take responsibility for. Right? He makes the suggestion that there's a purpose to the position you're in, but it's up to her to embrace it. And this is where I think if you've been in the church for a long time, I think this is often where people of faith go wrong. We're totally on board with like, yes, God can use this for good. Like, there is a purpose to the position we're in, but then it's like the response is, so just sit back, trust God, and watch what he can do. That's not what Mordecai says. He's like, perhaps there's a purpose to the position you're in. Now go risk your life believing that maybe God could do something crazy through what you're willing to do. Like for her, the question was, will you embrace the possibility that there's a purpose to the position you're in? Will you embrace it? Not just sit back and see, but act as if there is a purpose to the position you're in. And from that point in the story, things change direction. That's when things begin to flip. When Esther steps up in the place she is, forgetting how she got to where she is, but simply recognizing I'm here and maybe there's something I can do here that I wouldn't be able to do if I wasn't here. She embraces the reality that maybe, the possibility that maybe there's a purpose to the position that she's in. Maybe there's something that could be gained that could not be gained if you weren't in the position you're in. Maybe there's something you can learn that could not be learned if you are not in the position that you're in right now. Maybe there's something you can see that you would not be able to see if you weren't in the position that you're in right now. The story of Esther invites us to step back, especially in seasons when God is silent, when it seems like he's not there. It invites us to step back and consider the possibility that he's working behind the scenes in ways and at times we don't understand. And to embrace the possibility that there's a purpose, that I am where I am to accomplish something, to do something I wouldn't be able to do if I was not where I am right now, the way that I am right now. So I don't know what your situation looks like. Maybe you're a single parent. What does it look like for you to embrace the position you're in? Right? Like you can look at your situation as something you just got to get through. But maybe there's something that your kids can learn from you that they would not be able to learn if you weren't in the position you're in. And simply waking up in the morning believing that good can come from it, that will change the way that you act. Maybe you're in a job right now that you absolutely hate. And you're just trying to get to the next thing, just try and get through it because it feels hopeless and helpless. But maybe there's a purpose to the position you're in right now, as you are where you are. What does it look like to embrace that? I used to work with a guy who, he's a pastor now, but he used to be a cop in the city of Baltimore. And he went into that job believing that he was going to make an impact in the lives of the people on the streets of inner city Baltimore. And he went to work every day believing that. And that was what he prayed about, was what he thought about. He's like, I want to go there and make an impact. And he was there for years. And he left. And looking back, he's like, I thought I was going there to make an impact on the lives of people on the street. He's like, what I realized is that really my potential for impact was in the lives of the people that I worked with, the officers that rode in. He's like, that's actually the reason that I was there. That's where the impact was. And so he did make an impact as a police officer there on the lives of the people that he worked with. But simply walking into the situation, open to the possibility that there was purpose to be found in it, changed the way that he lived and acted in that season. And so it may just be an everyday thing for you, like going to work or going to school. Or maybe it's a season, a dark season. Maybe you've been diagnosed with something. And maybe there's a perspective that can be gained here that could not be gained if you weren't in the position that you're in. Maybe there's a loss you're experiencing. And there's something that you can see through this loss that you would not be able to see if you weren't going through this loss. There's a woman, her name's Joni Eareckson Tada. I'm sure some of you have heard of her. When she was 17 years old, she dove off of a dock, broke her neck, and was paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of her life. And she went through seasons of extreme darkness and hopelessness and depression until one day she recognized, like, maybe there's a purpose to this. She went on to write 40-something books. She started a global ministry. Like, people have said of her, she's been able to accomplish things in a wheelchair she wouldn't be able to accomplish if she were not in that wheelchair. In the books that she writes, she says this. She says, God permits what he hates to accomplish what he loves. Meaning, like, God doesn't enjoy the fact that she's paralyzed. We're told his heart breaks over stuff like that. But there's good that can be gained from the hardship that you're going through. What if you are where you are at the time you are, the way that you are, for a reason? If there's a purpose to the position you're in. We're out of time, but the band's going to come up here. We're going to sing one last song, but I'll leave you with this story. This story is not a perfect story, but for me, this is what this story has looked like in my world, like most recently, this idea, this principle. Last spring, my son Logan, he was 7 at the time. He was playing baseball, and it was like other kids started pitching. Coaches aren't pitching anymore. Kids are not pitching to each other. During the last game of the season, at his last at-bat, he was hit with a pitch in the face. And it was traumatizing. There was blood all over the place. It was obviously very painful. And that was the last game of the season. And so it was going to end either way. So we brought him home. We talked about it and just kind of moved on. This year, baseball season began. He signed up. I think we forgot about it, honestly. Signed up for baseball, got to practice. At his first practice, during his first practice, he took a line drive in the face. Same face. And same situation. There was blood all over the place. And at that point, he was terrified of the ball. Like, he did not want to get up to bat. During every game, he'd get in the batter's box, and as soon as the pitcher would wind up, he would just step out of the box and turn away. And it was heartbreaking watching him go through this. But Allie and I recognized that there was good that could come from this. That he could learn resilience, could learn to face his fears. And so we talk about it over and over again, like, just try to stay in the box. Just stay in the box. I called my baseball friends. I'm like, what do you do? How do you teach a kid to not be afraid of the ball? We got foam balls. We'd spend time in the backyard just pitching foam balls to him, teaching him, trying to help him find confidence in the bat. We're going through one, I'm talking to his coaches. We talked about it with our community group. I'm like, should we let him quit? Should we what do we do? We're talking to other parents about this. There's so much that's happening from this. Several games into the season, just a couple of weeks ago, he gets up to bat and he's facing the same pitcher that hit him last year, who didn't do it on purpose, it was an accident, but he's facing the same pitcher he faced last year. And the kid throws the pitch and he swings. He stays in the box. By the end of that at bat, he struck out, but he went down swinging 3 times. And when he took his third swing, everyone on the field cheered. Like the away team cheered because they struck the batter out. Our side cheered because the kid who got hit in the face twice stayed in the box and struck out. He got up again. He did the same thing again. He struck out again. He ended up getting player of the game, going 0 for 2 with 2 strikeouts. Two strikeouts. But that night, like he comes home, he's on top of the world, right? And that night, I'm sitting down in his bed, I was like, I want you to remember this. I want you to remember what it feels like to be resilient, to do something that is terrifying, and to stay in the box even when everything in you wants to get out. And as those words are coming out of my mouth, I told him, I'm like, watching you has helped me realize like where I need to stay in the box in my life. And as I said that to him, like immediately I thought of a situation I was in. I'll tell you about that some other time. But it was a situation where I want to get out of the box. Like I was afraid of getting hit. And there, like in that moment, it could not have been more clear that though I would have never wished this on my son, there was so much good that came from it. For him, for me, for our group, to the parents we spoke to, there's so much good that came from this. But it came because he was willing to recognize that maybe there's something to be gained from the hardship. He was willing to embrace the possibility that there's a purpose to the position he was in.
Hey, this is Lou. Thanks for listening. I hope that this was helpful for you in some way. So a lot of people don't know this, but Community Church is completely supported by the generous donations of people like you and me. And if you'd like to join that community of financial supporters, you can go to communitychurch.net/give, or you can give anytime on our church app. And so thanks for being part of this community, whether it's locally or from a distance. Thanks for investing in your faith. And thanks for being part of something that's bigger than yourself. Hope to see you soon.